ان اللہ و ملائکتہ یصلون علی النبی یا ایھا الذین آمنوا صلوا علیہ وسلموا تسلیما اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد اللہم صلی علی محمد النبی وعلی ذریتہ وعلی اہل بیتہ۔ حدیث قصہ۔ بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم۔ عن جابر ابن عبداللہ الانصاری عن فاطمۃ الزہراء علیہ السلام بنت رسول اللہ صلی اللہ علیہ وآلہ قال سمعت فاطمہ انہا قالت دخل علی برسول اللہ فی بعض الایام فقال السلام علیک یا فاطمہ فقلت علیک السلام قال انی اجد فی بدنی ضعفا فقلت له عیدک باللہ یا بتاہ من الضعف فقال یا فاطمہ ایتینی بالکساء الیمانی فغطینی بہ فاتیتہ بالکساء الیمانی فغطیتہ بہ وسرت انظر الیہ وَإِذَا وَجْهُهُ يَتَلَأْلَأُ كَأَنَّهُ الْبَدْرُ فِي لَيْلَةِ تَمَامِهِ وَكَمَالِهِ اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد فما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولدي الحسن قد أقبل وقال السلام عليك يا أمه فقلت وعليك السلام يا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي فقال يا أمه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جدي رسول الله فقلت نعم إن جدك تحت الكساء فأقبل الحسن نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا جدة يا رسول الله أتأذن لي أن أدخل معك تحت الكساء قال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا صاحب هودي قد أذنت لك فدخل معه تحت الكساء اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد فما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولدي الحسين قد أقبل وقال السلام عليك يا أمه فقلت وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي فقال لي يا أمه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جدي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله فقلت نعم إن جدك وأخاك تحت الكساء فدنا الحسين نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا جدة السلام عليك يا من اختاره الله أتأذن لي أن أكون معكما تحت الكساء فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا شافع أمتي قد أذنت لك فدخل معهما تحت الكساء اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد فاقبل عند ذلك أبو الحسن علي بن أبي طالب وقال السلام عليك يا بنت رسول الله. فقلت وعليك السلام يا أبا الحسن ويا أمير المؤمنين. فقال يا فاطمة إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة أخي وابن أمي رسول الله. فقلت نعم ها هو مع ولديك تحت الكساء. فأقبل علي نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله. أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ قال له عليك السلام يا أخي ويا وسيي وخليفتي وصاحب لواء قد أذنت لك. فدخل علي تحت الكساء. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ثم أتيت نحو الكساء وقلت السلام عليك يا أبتاه يا رسول الله. أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ قال وعليك السلام يا ابنتي ويا بدرتي قد أذنت لك. فدخلت تحت الكساء. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. فلما اكتملنا جميعا تحت الكساء أخذ برسول الله بطرف الكساء وأومأ بيده اليمنى إلى السماء وقال اللهم إن هؤلاء أهل بيتي وخاصتي وهامتي لحمهم لحمي ودمهم دمي يلمني ما يلمهم ويحزنني ما يحزنهم. أنا حرب لمن حاربهم وسلم لمن سالمهم وعدو لمن عاداهم ومحب لمن أحبهم. إنهم مني وأنا منهم. فاجعل صلواتك وبركاتك ورحمتك وغفرانك ورضوانك علي وعليهم واذهب عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. فقال الله عز وجل يا ملائكتي ويا سكان سماواتي إني ما خلقت سماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدهية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضيا ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا في محبة هؤلاء الذين هم تحت الكساء. فقال الأمين جبرائيل يا رب ومن تحت الكساء؟ فقال عز وجل هم أهل بيت النبوة ومعدن الرسالة. هم فاطمة وأبوها وبالها وبنوها. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. فقال جبرائيل يا رب أتأذنوا لي أن أهبط إلى الأرض ليكون معهم سادسا فقال الله نعم قد أذنت لك فهبط الأمين جبرائيل وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله العلي الأعلى يقرأك السلام ويخصك بالتحية والإكرام ويقول لك وعزتي وجلالي إني ما خلقت سماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدهية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضيا ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا لأجلكم ومحبتكم وقد أذن لي أن أدخل معكم فهل تأذن لي يا رسول الله فقال رسول الله وعليك السلام يا مينا وحي الله إنه نعم قد أذنت لك فدخل جبرائيل معنا تحت الكساء اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. فقال لأبي إن الله قد أوحى إليكم يقول إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. فقال علي لأبي يا رسول الله أخبرني ما لجلوسنا هذا تحت الكساء من الفضل عند الله فقال النبي والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني برسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيتنا ومحبينا إلا نزلت عليهم الرحمة وحفت بهم الملائكة واستغفرت لهم إلى أن يتفرقوا فقال لي إذا والله فزنا وفاز شيتنا ورب الكعبة اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. فقال النبي ثانيا يا علي والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني برسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيتنا ومحبينا وفيهم مهموم إلا وفرج الله هما ولا مغموم إلا وكشف الله غما ولا طالب حاجة إلا وقضى الله حاجته فقال علي إذا والله فزنا وسويدنا وكذلك شيئتنا فازوا وسويدوا في الدنيا والآخرة ورب الكعبة اللهم صل على محمد النبي وعلى ذريته وعلى أهل بيته اللهم صل على الصديقة الطاهرة فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين.
اللهم صل على محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد عجل فرجهم. حاصل جس مولا کی حضوری ہو جائے. حاصل جس مولا کی حضوری ہو جائے. دنیا کے غم و رنج سے دوری ہو جائے. اے صلی علی مجلس پر نور حسین. اے صلی علی مجلس پر نور حسین. ناری بھی یہاں آئے تو نوری ہو جائے. حاصل جس مولا کی بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات. اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد وعجل فرج. ایک اور درود بھیجیے محمد و آل محمد پر. اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد. کچھ تو ہے در کچھ علی کچھ مرتضی کہنے لگے کچھ تو ہے در کچھ علی، کچھ مرتضی کہنے لگے، کچھ شب ہجرت محمد مصطفیٰ کہنے لگے، یا علی یا علی، اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد وجل۔ کچھ شب ہجرت محمد مصطفیٰ کہنے لگے، ڈرتے ڈرتے ہم نے تو اللہ کی قدرت کہا، ڈرتے ڈرتے ہم نے تو اللہ کی قدرت کہا، توبہ توبہ یہ نصیری تو خدا کہنے لگے، کچھ تو ہے در کچھ علی، درود بھیجیے محمد آل محمد، اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد وعجل فرجہ۔ ایک اور سوز تھوڑا سا، اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد وعجل۔ تسبیح فاطمہ جو ادا کی تسبیح فاطمہ جو ادا کی جاسوس نے خبر یہ کہی آکے کی سیر گھاٹ گھاٹ کی اس دم غلام نے کی سیر گھاٹ گھاٹ کی اس دم غلام نے آب رواں بھی بند کیا فوج شام نے فوج خدا کو نہر سے دوری نصیب ہے فوج خدا کو نہر سے دوری نصیب ہے شہبولے کیا مذائقہ کوثر قریب ہے فوج خدا کو نہر سے دوری نصیب ہے شہبولے کیا مذائقہ کوثر قریب ہے تسبیح فاطمہ اور محمد و آل محمد صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. نعرہ تکبیر، اللہ اکبر. نعرہ رسالت یا رسول اللہ. نعرہ حیدری یا علی علیہ السلام. حسینیت زندہ باد، حسینیت زندہ باد، یزیدیت مردہ آباد، دشمنان اہل بیت پہ لعنت، بے شمار لعنت. جہاں کہیں بھی پروگرام دیکھ رہے ہیں، سن رہے ہیں، آپ کو سلام پیش کرتا ہوں تحفہ یا علی مدد، اور دل کی گہرائیوں سے محمد اہل بیت محمد پر صلوات پڑھ دیں. اللہم صل علی محمد و آل محمد. اللہم صل علی محمد و آل محمد. ہم اگر فرش عزا گھر گھر بچھانا چھوڑ دے، آسماں والے زمین پر، آسماں والے زمین پر آنا جانا چھوڑ دے. ہم اگر فرش عزا گھر گھر بچھانا چھوڑ دیں، آسماں والے زمین پر، آسماں والے زمین پر آنا جانا چھوڑ دے، ہم مگر فرش عزا گھر گھر بچھانا چھوڑ دے۔ اے زمین تجھ میں نہ ہو گر سر زمین کربلا، چاند سورج، اے زمین تجھ میں نہ ہو گر سر زمین کربلا، چاند اور سورج تیرے، چاند اور سورج تیرے چکر لگانا چھوڑ دے، ہم مگر فرش عزا گھر گھر بچھانا چھوڑ دیں۔ نشر ہو جائیں جو سب تیرے فضائل کربلا، نشر ہو جائیں جو سب تیرے فضائل کربلا، رب کعبہ کی قسم، رب کعبہ کی قسم سب حج پہ جانا چھوڑ دیں، ہم مگر فرش عزا گھر گھر بچھانا چھوڑ دیں۔ پنجتن نے خود پڑھی ہے جب تو پھر اے دوستو، پنجتن نے خود پڑھی ہے جب تو پھر اے دوستو، کس طرح سے ہم نمازیں، کس طرح سے ہم نمازیں پنجگانا چھوڑ دیں، ہم مگر فرش عزا گھر گھر بچھانا چھوڑ دیں۔ اصغر معصوم کے لب پر تبسم آ گیا، اصغر معصوم کے لب پر تبسم آ گیا، پھول کلیوں سے کہو، پھول کلیوں سے کہو اب مسکرانا چھوڑ دے، ہم مگر فرش عزا گھر گھر بچھانا چھوڑ دیں۔ پھر نہ چھیڑیں گے کبھی ہم آپ کے شجرے کی بات، پھر نہ چھیڑیں گے کبھی ہم آپ کے شجرے کی بات، آپ بھی ذکر علی میں، آپ بھی ذکر علی پر دل ملانا چھوڑ دیں، ہم مگر فرش عزا گھر گھر بچھانا چھوڑ دیں۔ شوق سے پی لے نصیری حب حیدر کی شراب، شوق سے پی لے نصیری حب حیدر کی شراب، بس گزارش ہے، بس گزارش ہے کہ پی کے لڑکھڑانا چھوڑ دے، ہم مگر فرش عزا گھر گھر بچھانا چھوڑ دے۔ پر محمد اہل بیت محمد صلوات، اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد۔ مجھے کوئی سکینہ نہیں کہتا بابا، قیدی کہتا ہے کوئی، قیدی کہتا ہے کوئی، کوئی یتیماں بابا، ہائے اب مجھے کوئی سکینہ نہیں کہتا بابا، قیدی کہتا ہے کوئی، قیدی کہتا ہے کوئی، کوئی یتیماں بابا، ہائے اب مجھے کوئی سکینہ نہیں کہتا بابا میں بیاں کیسے کروں اپنی مصیبت تم سے کیا کروں اپنے تماچوں کی شکایت تم سے سنتی ہوں دادی نے کھایا تھا تماچا بابا ہائے اب مجھے کوئی سکینہ نہیں کہتا بابا خون بے شیر سے اندازہ کیا تھا میں نے آپ کا چہرہ تو پہچان لیا تھا میں نے آپ پہچانو گے کیسے میرا چہرہ بابا ہائے اب مجھے کوئی سکینہ نہیں کہتا بابا وہ تو بیمار تھی مر جاتی سفر میں آ کے دفن کرتے اسے بازار میں بھیا کیسے یہ تو اچھا ہوا ہی نہیں سغرا بابا ہائے اب مجھے کوئی سکینہ نہیں کہتا بابا اس گھڑی ڈھونڈ رہی تھی میں چچا جان کا سر کیسے بتلاؤں کہ کیا گزری تیری بیٹی پر مجھ کو ظالم نے کنیزی میں جو مانگا بابا مجھ کو ظالم نے کنیزی میں جو مانگا بابا ہائے اب مجھے کوئی سکینہ نہیں کہتا بابا نیل رخساروں پہ بینائی بھی جس کی کم ہو عمر ہو 4 برس اور کمر میں خم ہو آپ نے دیکھی ہے کیا ایسی ضعیفہ بابا ہائے اب مجھے کوئی سکینہ نہیں کہتا بابا قیدی کہتا ہے کوئی قیدی کہتا ہے کوئی یتیمہ بابا ہائے اب مجھے کوئی سکینہ نہیں کہتا بابا اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد وعجل فرجہ
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Jazakallah Yasin bhai. Without taking any more time, I'd like to do a few announcements. The first one is these are going to be 3 majalis starting today till Sunday, and then after Sunday we have our Arba'in Silsila starting from Monday all the way till Friday. It will be addressed by Maulana Shabib al-Husseini, and the flyer will be coming out soon. Our guest for the next upcoming 3 lectures honestly needs no introduction. He is he's known throughout the Shia world, and not just the Shia world, but in the Sunni world as well. He's famously known as the Twitter Maulana, followed by millions, loved by millions all around social media. He's none other than Shaykh Azhar Nasser. He was born and raised right here in the United States in Michigan, has a degree from the University of Michigan. He completed his studies, and then he actually pursued his religious studies in the Hawza of Najaf under Ayatollah Sistani and Ayatollah Hakim. He's the religious director of CBE, an organization which specializes in production of short videos, spiritually uplifting videos. He's also the author of 2 books, The Grand Tour, Quranic Descriptions of Paradise, and Spiritual Prescriptions, published in 2019. He's the religious director of curriculum planning. He's also the co-founder of the Tasneem Institute. I'm proud that I'm very happy to have him with us in the Ribatul. He stays very busy, and to get him on to get his schedule is very tough. So I've been trying to get a hold of him for almost 2 years, and alhamdulillah, this year we were able to get a hold of him because he's not traveling. So without any further ado, I would like to invite our member, Brother Shaykh Azhar Nasser. Maulana, are you there? Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa
Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.
اللهم صل
على محمد وآل محمد.
صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله، صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة، ويا عبرة كل مؤمن ومؤمنة. يا ليتنا فيا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي، فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. قال تعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، ولله العزة ولرسوله وللمؤمنين ولكن المنافقين لا يعلمون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
So I'd like to begin by expressing my gratitude to the organizers for inviting me to address you for the next 3 nights. And for those of you who follow my lectures, you know that I typically speak about Islamic spirituality and Islamic ethics. But for this lecture series, I'd like to depart from my norm. And I'd like to address a topic that I think is of the utmost importance. And it's a topic that is relevant, especially to Muslims who live in the West. And the theme for our discussion, beginning tonight and continuing for the next 3 nights, is the Muslim inferiority complex. And we're going to be exploring the different factors, the different ideologies that have put Muslims historically on the defensive. We always, when I meet Muslims from around the world, I always get the sense that they're constantly measuring themselves against the West, against other civilizations, other ideologies. There seems to be this perpetual effort to fit in, to be accepted by the modern world, by the West. So beginning tonight, I want to really deconstruct and speak about this phenomenon known as the Muslim inferiority complex. Now, before we delve into our discussion, I'd like to share a few statistics based on research that was conducted by the Pew Research Center. It's a very reputable global organization. And they conducted a study recently on the Muslim community in America and their relationship with their faith. And among the things that they discovered is that 52% of Muslims in America, Muslims like you and I, 52% of Muslims in America believe that Islam needs to be reformed or reinterpreted. That's a shocking number, brothers and sisters. More than half of American Muslims believe that there are problems within the Islamic tradition that are irreconcilable, that either have to be changed, thrown out, or reinterpreted to conform to Western values, to conform to the modern world. That's one statistic. The second is that 50% of Muslims, half of the Muslim population in America, and I would assume that these statistics hold true for even other countries as well. 50% of Muslims in America believe that society needs to accept homosexuality. 50%. We're not talking about non-Muslims. We're talking about people who identify as followers of the Islamic tradition. 50% of them believe, and this indicates that they believe that homosexuality is a normative expression of human sexuality. I often tell people that if Prophet Lut was alive today, Muslims, forget about non-Muslims, there are many Muslims that would label him as a radical. They would label him as someone who is engaging in hate speech. They would consider him to be homophobic if Prophet Lut was among us today. And this is a significant statistic because, so we said that Pew discovered, found that 50% of Muslims in America believe that homosexuality is normal and it's fine and it should be accepted. And this is a 20 percentage point increase from 10 years ago. Meaning in 2008 or 2009, 2010, about a decade ago, 30% of Muslims in America believe that society needs to accept homosexuality. In a span of 10 years, brothers and sisters, it's increased by 20 percentage points. Why is it? Why is this happening? We have to understand this. We have to try to explore these questions to understand why is it that we see this shift. The Pew Research Center also looked at what percentage of Muslims who are raised Muslim continue to identify as Muslims in their adult lives. So how many people who are born into Islam actually retain their Islamic identity when they're older, when they enter adulthood? 70%. Which means what? Which means 30% of Muslims who are raised in Muslim households grow up, they enter adulthood, and they no longer identify as Muslims. We often pride ourselves, when we speak about Islam in the West, Islam in America, the most popularized statistic is that Islam is the fastest growing religion in America or in the West or in the world. But the reality, my dear brothers and sisters, is that there's actually another category that we often miss, that we overlook. And that is that the fastest growing religion is the category of people who believe in God but don't subscribe to any organized religion. That's actually the fastest growing religion. So we see Muslims who grow up, they might retain their belief in God, but they no longer identify or subscribe to an organized religion. Why is this happening? And I think that these statistics should be alarming to us. Most of the time, our communities are fighting with each other over what color the carpet should be at the masjid. We fight over whether we should do certain rituals. Should we do Surah Yasin on Thursday night, or should we omit it? And there are big fights and arguments. Should we do the wafat on this night or on the weekend? We fight over which center allows you to do zanjir and which center is against it. Meanwhile, our kids are leaving Islam. Just because your kid comes to the masjid with you, it doesn't mean that they're still a Muslim. They might come because you're pressuring them. So we are in the midst of an identity crisis, brothers and sisters. And there's a tradition from Imam al-Sadiq, salawatullahi alayhi, where he says, he speaks about the importance of understanding current times, understanding the issues of your time. Al-alimu bi zamanih la tahjumu alayhi al-lawabis. The one who is aware, who has knowledge of the issues of their time, they are not bombarded with confusion. As followers of Ahlul Bayt, we have to be analytical people. We have to be people of reflection. We have to ask ourselves, why is this happening? And of course, this is a very complicated question. I don't claim to have the complete answer or the complete solution, but there is no doubt that there are certain ideologies that are prevalent in the world today and that have been prevalent for many centuries that has contributed to this identity crisis, especially in the Muslim community. And if I were to put my finger on the ideology that I believe has caused catastrophic problems for the Muslim community, I would say that one of the most dangerous ideologies is philosophical liberalism. Now, what is philosophical liberalism? Now, I don't want you to get confused with, when I say liberalism, you automatically assume I'm talking about politics. Shaykh is talking about Democrats. I'm not talking about political liberalism. I'm not talking about Democrats or Republicans. I'm talking about philosophical liberalism. I'm speaking about a specific worldview. What is philosophical liberalism? Now, I don't want to bore you with all of these terms, but I think that just for at least a foundational understanding, we need to be familiar with these ideas. Philosophical liberalism, which is, by the way, it is the everything in Western civilization, whether it's politics, economics, social order, is predicated on this philosophy. What is philosophical liberalism? And by the way, Democrats, Republicans, they're all philosophical liberals. They just might differ about how to achieve it. In a nutshell, philosophical liberalism is the idea that morality, what is right, what is morally good, is a function of maximizing liberty, freedom, and equality. It's the idea, and this idea has roots in the Enlightenment period. We have the Dark Ages in Europe, where the Roman Catholic Church was really the superpower of Europe, and they persecuted scientists, and it was an age of superstition. And then people gradually moved towards science, and they saw science and reason as a way to understand the world. And therefore, you find that this idea of philosophical pluralism developed. And it's the idea that the way to achieve prosperity is to maximize freedom, maximize liberty, maximize equality, and anything that does that is good. It's considered morally good, and that is what will allow people to achieve happiness and prosperity. It's all about maximizing pleasure, minimizing pain. And the way that we do that is by ensuring that we give people liberty, freedom, and equality. We maximize those values. Now you may say, why is this a problem? What is the problem with philosophical liberalism? If we want to understand an ideology, we have to look at its history. We have to look at its origins, what it was designed to do. Now, from an Islamic perspective, we already see that as problematic. The idea that you should be entirely free, that we should try to implement equality and absolute freedom and absolute liberty, and we should strive to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. There are already conflicts with the Islamic worldview. But when you look into the history of philosophical liberalism, you find that liberalism, which is now the foundation of Western civilization, liberalism, by and large, was used as a tool against the Muslim world during the colonial period. So it has roots in the Enlightenment period, but it really crystallized in the 19th century when European powers were colonizing the Muslim world. Now, what was happening exactly? And you'll understand, and I'm gonna give you evidence as to how this happened over the course of the past 200 years and how it is still happening, how this liberal program is being implemented today. So the reality is that colonial powers in the 19th century, when they wanted to colonize Muslim lands, they actually made deliberate efforts to manipulate Muslims into rejecting their faith. So let's reflect for a few moments on the process of colonization in the Muslim world. Now, when Britain, when France, when these countries, when these imperial powers, when these colonial powers were invading Muslim lands and they were colonizing Muslim countries, the way that they colonized is very striking. If you look at the process, you find that the first priority of the colonizer was, and whether we're talking about Iraq or Iran or India or parts of North Africa, this is something that we see as a common theme, a common denominator. The first priority is that colonizers destroyed religious institutions of learning. I want you to understand tonight that the Muslim inferiority complex goes back to the colonial period. That this feeling that, that this feeling that young Muslims have today, even some of our ancestors, this hate for Islam, this feeling embarrassed to be Muslim, to feel inferior in the face of Western culture, this is not random. This was a process. So the first priority of colonizers was to do what? To destroy religious institutions of learning. And this is not a conspiracy theory, brothers and sisters. This was real. This was documented. I'll give you a couple of examples. Many of us know that Spain was under Muslim control for hundreds of years, 600-700 years. In the late 15th century, Spain, Muslim-controlled Spain, was conquered by Catholic monarchs. Now, of course, when colonizers take over, when a country is occupied, you have the typical mass killings. But in addition to the mass killings, what do we see? We see that colonizers literally burned libraries. They destroyed the Islamic intellectual heritage. They literally burned down libraries. They destroyed the institutions of Islamic learning. Another example, that's what happened in Spain, the literal burning of this intellectual heritage. In 1857, in West Africa, the French colonial government sought to control and reduce, keyword is to reduce, the influence of Islamic education on the population. So you see that colonizers, they come in, and one of the first things that they do is that they take control of the curriculum that is taught in schools. And one of the first things that the French did in West Africa is that they reduced Islamic education. Now the question is, why would they do that? Why would they do that? If Islam is just about praying and fasting, why would they do that? It's because colonizers understood the power of the Islamic tradition. That if people are connected to Islam, if they're connected to their faith, we won't be able to control them. They won't live in subjugation. They won't bow their heads. They will demand to live a life of dignity and honor. If you look at, for example, many of you may have heard of Lord Cromer, who was a British diplomat, and he was put in charge of the colonial project for Egypt, British's colonial project. So he was basically one of the key figures in the Egyptian occupation. And this guy, his real name was Evelyn Baring. You know, look into it. Go research tonight about what Lord Cromer said about Islam and Muslims in Egypt. He wrote a book in 1916. You know, I'm mentioning all of these quotations so you know that this is not just a conspiracy theory. This is well documented that colonial powers made a concerted effort to manipulate Muslims into hating their faith, into rejecting their faith. And this has trickled down generation after generation, and we see the effects of it today. Lord Cromer wrote a book. He published a book in 1916 entitled Modern Egypt, where he details the colonial project. What does he say? I want you to listen very carefully, brothers and sisters. He says, and it's amazing how explicit they were. You know, today politicians, they're a lot more diplomatic. You know, they're still colonizing the Muslim world, but they'll use more gentle language, like we're aiding developing countries. The efforts are the same. It's the same project, but the language has just changed. So he says, so Lord Cromer says about the colonization of Egypt, he says it is absurd to suppose Europe will look on as a passive spectator, whilst the retrograde, look at how he describes the Egyptian government, while the retrograde government based purely on Muhammadan principles and Oriental ideals is established in Egypt. So again, they never refer to Islam as Islam. They would call it Muhammadan religion. You know, you can even hear the contempt they have for Islam, Muhammadan. So he's basically saying that Britain is not going to just sit back and allow this country to be run by people who follow Muhammad. Why are you interested in Egypt, oh Lord Cromer? He says the material interests at stake are too important. It's the same story as Iraq, as Afghanistan. It's the same story. There are economic incentives for them. And listen to what he says. The new generation of Egyptians has to be persuaded, if we're going to rob this country, if we're going to exploit Egypt, he says the new generation of Egyptians, Egypt is a Muslim country, predominantly Muslim country, the new generation of Egyptians has to be persuaded or forced into imbibing the true spirit of Western civilization. One of the things that colonizers did is that they also, in addition to destroying the religious institutions, they actually took it a step further. And they created a ruling elite class in the countries that they occupied. And this ruling elite class were secular Muslims. They put secular Muslims to run these countries. And what they would do is they would identify Muslims who are secular, they would educate them in the West, and they would send them back to run the countries. Lord Cromer, he speaks about this. He says the truth, because colonizers understood that we can't just go into Muslim countries and tell them you have to leave Islam. No, they say things like, no, you guys can still be Muslim, but let us reform, let us refine Islam for you. Let us reform Islam. So Lord Cromer says the truth is that in passing through the European educational mill, so they would select certain Egyptians to re-educate them in the West, but what was the ultimate aim? The truth is that in passing through the European educational mill, the young Egyptian Muslim loses his Islamism. They weren't doing it just because they want to, be good Samaritans and offer you opportunity. One of the primary goals is so you lose your religious identity. So you are a reformed Muslim. You're just Muslim by name now. Your essence is that you've completely imbibed Western values. He also says, it is conceivable that as time goes on, so look at the long-term project. You know, colonizers, they think in generational terms. We Muslims, we think about what's happening next week for Dua Kumail. What kind of biryani are we serving next week? We don't have vision. Colonizers, shayateen, they think generationally. What does he say? It is conceivable that as time goes on, the Muslims will develop a religion, possibly a pure deism. That, you know, we hope they'll just reach a point where we believe in God, but we don't practice any organized religion. That the hope is that Muslims will develop a religion, possibly a pure deism, which will not be altogether the Islamism of the past. We want to do away with this Islam that they have. So you see that there was a concerted effort, brothers and sisters, to separate the Muslim from his faith, because the less Muslim they are, the easier they will be to colonize. It's really sad, brothers and sisters. And, you know, many of you may have heard of William Gladstone. You know, in the 19th century, you know, for a time he was the British prime minister, but in the House of Commons, you know, as Britain was colonizing the Muslim world, do you know what he did? He held up the Quran. He held up the Quran in the House of Commons. And what did he say? So long as there is this book, meaning the Quran, there will be no peace in the world. What does he mean by that? What he means is that as long as this Quran exists, we're not going to be able to assert British dominance around the world. The imperialistic project will fail. We won't be able to occupy Muslim lands. We won't be able to colonize Muslim territory if they hold on to the Quran. Isn't it sad, brothers and sisters, that non-Muslims, colonizers understand the power of the Quran, but we don't. But we don't. Now, you know, even if you look at the language, you know, a lot of the language that's used in philosophical liberalism, which has become part of our vernacular, has roots in philosophical liberalism. I'll give you a very simple example. How many of us have been, and look at how Muslims have internalized philosophical liberalism, that it's all about being free. It's all about choice. That why are you forcing yourself, why are you restricting yourself to this Sharia? You're missing out on life. You know, I've been to many Muslim conferences on hijab, about Fatima Zahra. And usually, you know, when we speak about hijab, we use terms like choice. Hijab is a choice. Hijab is empowerment. This is language that we borrowed from philosophical liberalism. We don't have our own language. We don't have our own language to speak about hijab. If you look at the traditions of Ahlul Bayt, our imams never spoke about hijab as a choice. They never said that, oh, hijab is about empowerment. They never used that language. Hijab is not a choice, brothers and sisters. You know what's a choice? A choice is if you break your fast intentionally in the month of Ramadan, you have a choice to feed 60 people, 60 poor people, or fast for 2 consecutive months. That's a choice. When you wake, you don't have a choice to pray Salatul Fajr or not. No, you don't have a choice. Hijab is not a choice. But the reason why we use this language is because we've internalized philosophical liberalism. It's because we're ashamed to even use the language that our imams used. because we feel inferior to the West, and therefore we use their language. And when you internalize language, you also internalize the ideas that are associated with that language. Hijab is a choice. Is there a hadith that says hijab is a choice? If you're Muslim, hijab is wajib. It's not a choice. A choice means that you have the option of doing it or not. It's very dangerous. And the problem is that you have Muslim organizations who have entire conferences and they call it empowerment and choice. This all goes back to the Muslim inferiority complex. We always feel inferior to Europe, to the West, as if we don't have a rich intellectual heritage. Have we forgotten that when Europe was in the dark ages, when they were literally burning scientists to death, the Muslims were the leaders of civilization? They were the scientists. They were the great minds. We got to go back to our own tradition. If you look at hijab, and I know, of course, we live in a time where, men are not allowed to speak about hijab, right? Because again, it's all thanks to philosophical liberalism. And one branch of philosophical liberalism is feminism, right? And there are many people, many Muslim women who identify as feminists, and many of them don't even have any idea what the origins of feminism. If you ask them, okay, explain to me, speak to me about the history of feminism. They'll be like, okay, so there's first wave feminism. No, I'm not talking about first wave feminism. Talk to me about the feminism that predates first wave feminism. We add all of these isms because being Muslim is not enough. I'm a Muslim feminist. I'm a Muslim this. Islam is not enough. Didn't Allah say, "Al-yawm akmaltu lakum dinakum"? Why do you need all of these qualifiers? Because you have this need to be embraced by a culture that you feel is superior, that the Islam of Ahlul Bayt is too inferior, it's incomplete. So even when we think about hijab, colonizers, they would condition Muslims to look at the European woman as the ideal, that's normal, that's the default, that's the natural way to look, that you should aspire to be like the European woman. The way that the European woman looks is the norm. Muslims were conditioned to think like this. And anything that deviates from that norm needs an explanation. Why are you covering up? Why do we even have to answer that question? Why are we on the defensive? Why is it assumed that to be uncovered is the norm? Why can't we flip the question and assume that being covered is the norm? Why are you uncovered? Maybe Muslims need to grow a backbone instead of always playing, being apologetic and on the defensive. Why are you wearing hijab? Why is your hair uncovered? The assumption is what? See, again, this internalized Islamophobia, it has roots from the colonial period. When it comes to sexual behavior, I just mentioned the statistic, the depressing statistic. 50% of American Muslims believe that, society should accept homosexuality. It's no problem. In fact, it's even worse. Not only do we accept it, if we're invited to the wedding, we go to the wedding, and it's my cousin, it's my brother, it's my son. Islam says silatul rahim. Islam says silatul rahim. This is silatul rahim. To abandon your Islamic values and encourage people to commit haram. You think Nabi Nuh didn't know about silatul rahim? How far have we departed, brothers and sisters? So when it comes to sexual behavior, sexual orientation, philosophical liberalism, again, it's all about freedom and liberty, because that's what determines that if something is morally good or not. So philosophical liberalism teaches that if you have a desire, you should act on that desire. Why? It's not healthy It's not healthy to suppress your desires. If you have desires, yeah. Why are you gonna, get married? No. Just, masturbation is seen as completely normal and healthy, and date and be promiscuous. You shouldn't suppress yourself. And that's why I always advise Muslims that if you want to go to a counselor or a therapist, make sure you go to a Muslim therapist. Otherwise, if you're speaking to someone who doesn't conform to the Islamic moral code, their advice might be that, yeah, this hijab is causing you depression and you just kind of need to, remove these shackles from your life, and you have to kind of put yourself out there and go out for a dance, have a drink of wine, be more social. So if you condition people, so imagine this has been happening for at least 200 to 300 years. And what do you think the effect of that is going to be? That if the dominant philosophical worldview is that it's all about liberty and freedom and removing restrictions, then of course people are going to feel that Islam is tying them down. It's because everything is built on this philosophical presupposition. So when it comes to hijab, when it comes to sexual orientation, who decides what should be covered? Who decides what constitutes healthy sexual behavior? Who decides that? People? The same people who thought homosexuality was immoral in the 1950s. These same people, I trust them. The same people who have no objective morality, where it's just about what's the status quo. These are the people that I should trust. Who decides? Who decides? How about our creator? How about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Who's the creator, who knows us better than we know ourselves, who knows what brings harm, who knows what is to our benefit, what benefits us, what harms us. And if you think that this is something that just happened in the past, that, those poor Muslims who were colonized in Egypt and in India and in Iraq, it's also happening today, brothers and sisters. The colonization of the Muslim mind is an ongoing project. And if you don't believe me, reflect on the media, for example. There are only certain types of Muslims that are given platforms on mainstream media, that are actually given regular platforms. Who do we see in the media usually? And this is all designed to manipulate Muslims into rejecting the traditional Islam. There are two types of Muslims. Not all, but generally, you will see two types of Muslims who are featured in media. The fanatical fundamentalist, the guy who's shouting Allahu Akbar with rice in his beard, who has broken English, who seems like they've lost their minds, that they're out of touch. Yeah, that type of Muslim will be featured. Why? Because it serves the agenda. People don't want to be associated with Islam anymore. And then you have the second group, which was what? The reformed Muslim, right? The reformed Muslim, the forward thinking, the progressive thinking Muslim, the type of Muslims that say that, hijab is just a cultural practice. It has no basis in the Quran or Islam. Let's look at the hijab is not even mentioned in the Quran. They took a class, an Arabic grammar class at a community college, and now they want to speak with authority about ancient Arabic, about Quranic Arabic. These are the types of people. The type of Muslims that say that no, there's nothing, Islam totally supports people's freedom to choose what their sexual orientation is. Oh, the story of Qawm Lut, no, Allah was condemning rape. If it was consensual, Prophet Lut would have said ahlan wa sahlan if it was consensual. These are the types of Muslims that are given platforms. The organizations that have these types of theological leanings are going to get funded. These are the NGOs that are going to be deployed in the Muslim world to assist developing countries. It's happening today, brothers and sisters. Right? The Muslims that are visible are either the radicals or the reformers. The Muslims like you and I, the devout Muslims, no, you have no place. It's not, we don't want that type of Islam. Because if this Islam becomes popularized, you can't manipulate them. Because they're people of morals, they're people of consciousness. It's the same reason why colonizers destroyed institutions of religious learning. You can't control people if they read Quran and they study Quran and they're Quranically literate. They won't accept you in their country because they have dignity, because their dignity comes from Allah, because they have a sense of justice, they have a sense of honor. People study Islam, they'll learn from Imam al-Hussein, they'll learn the slogan of Hayhat min nadhilla. Of course, they're not going to want you to follow traditional Islam. They're going to want you to follow the loosey-goosey Islam of reformists. And they'll show you the radical Muslims, and you're like, yeah, I don't want to be associated with that. It's all to manipulate you into disassociating yourself from the pure Islam. And I'll end with a couple more statistics to show you that the liberal project, the philosophical liberal project, is ongoing today. Still happening. You know, 80%, for those of you who watched media, 80%, and this is a shocking number, 80% of media coverage of Islam and Muslims is negative. If Islam is being mentioned on the news, 80% of the time, it's going to be something negative. It's not, Muhammad planted a tree today at a park. No. It's Muhammad has a pressure cooker and he's going to blow us all up. That's the Muhammad that we hear about. It's not all the Muslims that are doing wonderful things for their communities. It's always the lunatic. And this person is deranged, not because they have mental problems. It's because there's something about their faith that's making them like that. When it's a white dude named George, no, he's mentally deranged. But if it's a Muslim, alhamdulillah, it seems like there's no mental illnesses in the Muslim community. It's all related to their faith. 80% of media coverage on Islam and Muslims is negative. And do you want to know what's really shocking? Have you guys heard of North Korea? You know the country, North Korea? North Korea, which is actually designated as a terrorist state by the US, a country that has actually made threats against the United States. When North Korea is mentioned in the media, it gets negative coverage 72% of the time, which means that Muslims are portrayed, Islam and Muslims are portrayed more negatively than North Korea. And you wonder why people don't want to identify as Muslims anymore. The New York Times, which is seen, and by the way, this is another problem when Muslims, they align themselves with the left, as if the left are their awliya, as if, some people, they talk about some democratic politicians as if they're so excited, as if Imam Sahib al-Zaman has reappeared, that this is the savior, right? As if this is the savior. The New York Times, which is seen as a leftist media outlet, the New York Times, and so forget about Fox News and Washington, the New York Times portrays Islam more negatively than cocaine and cancer. So there's research done on this. Go research. So what's the solution? So philosophical liberalism is not this benign, it was actually weaponized. It was designed to manipulate Muslims into rejecting their faith. So what's the solution? What do we do? What we do is that we have to be smart. If the first order of business of the colonizer, if their first objective was to destroy religious institutions of learning, the way that we counteract this liberal project is what? We become Islamically literate. We gain authentic Islamic knowledge, brothers and sisters. And I'm not talking about Muharram Majalis and Ramadan Majalis and Arba'in Majalis. That's just maw'ala. These Majalis, yeah, you'll learn something, but I'm talking about structured Islamic learning. Some of us, the last time we actually took Islamic classes is when we were 15 years old in madrasa. And we act as though we graduated from Islam and we don't need to learn anymore. I just send my kids because they need to learn Islam. Meanwhile, the brother is 50, 60 years old and he doesn't even do his wudu properly. He's 50, 60 years old and he doesn't have the slightest clue about his aqa'id. He'll tell you about every single mutual fund on the face of the earth. But if you ask him, how do you prove Allah is one? How do you know that there's only one God, one creator? No answer. You believe in the akhir. How do you know there's life after death? What are you going to recite Surah An-Naba for people? What's your rational proof? We don't know. We don't have answers. How do you know the Quran is the word of God? Prove it rationally. Do we have even this basic knowledge? We don't. We think that just because I call myself a Shia, that's it. And that's why I believe that many Muslims, especially Shia Muslims, we're very lazy. We act as though we don't have to seek knowledge. As long as I love Imam Hussein, khalas, that's it. That's enough. If it was enough, why would Imam al-Sadiq spend so much time raising scholars if it's just enough to just love Ahlul Bayt? Why would Imam al-Baqir, Imam al-Sadiq spend day and night training ulama? Because it matters. You need to be knowledgeable. There's no excuse for ignorance. Maybe in the past, people had excuses. They didn't have access to scholars or books or to learning. Now, what's the excuse? What's the excuse? The excuse now is that we don't take our faith seriously. We're busy making silly videos on TikTok because we want to be famous. Believe me, if we spent half of the, I know people are not going to leave social media, and nor am I advocating for that. But at least spend a half an hour a day reading, gaining Islamic knowledge. And I'll end with this one final hadith. Imam al-Sadiq, so as we said, if colonizers occupied Muslim lands because they destroyed religious institutions of learning, they separated the laity from ulama. They discredited traditional scholars and they promoted reformists. That's why whenever we hear anyone attacking marji'iyya, be very wary of these types of people, because that's exactly what colonizers used to do. Be very careful of people like that. They might be eloquent and they might act like pseudo-intellectuals, but the reality is they're doing the same thing that colonizers used to do. That they separate the masses from traditional ulama. And we're very blessed as Shia Muslims that we have the institution of marji'iyya, which was actually established not by us, it was established by the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. So if anyone attacks this institution, is as attacking an institution that was built by the Ma'sumin. Imam al-Sadiq, what does he say? He says that the Prophet says, he narrates from the Prophet, Uffil li rajulin. The Prophet is saying uff. The Prophet is expressing frustration with a type of person who does what? Uffin li rajulin la yufarrighu nafsahu fi kulli jumu'ah li amri din. The Prophet says, woe be unto the person who does not dedicate one day a week for Islamic learning. Some of us, we go months and years without any Islamic learning. We come to the Majlis, we're not even paying attention, and we just check, we tick off a box as if we're playing a game with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As if the Prophet didn't say, talabul ilmi fariḍah. Seeking knowledge is not encouraged in Islam. It's an obligation, just like your salah and your sawm. If you can't do a half an hour, there should be at least one day a week where you spend a couple hours, few hours, and you're connected to a scholar, that you're seeking knowledge. This is what our imams used to do, brothers and sisters. This is what Imam al-Sadiq was doing. He was raising a generation of scholars, because our identity is interconnected with knowledge. If you don't want your mind to be colonized, it's going to be colonized if it's an empty mind. But if it's a mind that's filled with the ulum of Ahlul Bayt, do you think people can manipulate you? They can't. They won't be able to. And since I mentioned Imam al-Sadiq, let's connect the musibah to Imam al-Sadiq and then to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. You know, when we speak about the family of the Prophet, you know, one of the reasons why the Ahlul Bayt were always oppressed is because the tyrants always saw them as a threat. Because Ahlul Bayt, they used to awaken the hearts of people. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam was targeted by the zalim of his time. Mansur al-Diwaniqi, he actually set fire to the house of Imam al-Sadiq. You know, when we speak about setting fire to a house, we automatically think of Fatima al-Zahra. But that was not the only house of Al-Muhammad that was burnt. The house of Ja'far al-Sadiq in Medina was set on fire by that mal'oon, Mansur. And the Imam alayhi salam, he was able to put out that fire. And the traditions say that the companions of Imam al-Sadiq, the Imam had many companions, many lovers, many people who revered him. He's the grandson of the Prophet. The next day they came to visit Imam al-Sadiq. And they entered the house of Imam al-Sadiq and they saw the Imam sitting in a corner of the house and he looked distressed. They asked him, Ya ibn Rasulullah, why are you in tears? Why do you look anguished? Is it because these oppressors have violated your right? Is it because they had the audacity of attacking the family of the Prophet? Imam al-Sadiq, he says, no, I'm not crying because of that. The Imam alayhi salam, do you know what he says, brothers and sisters? He says, La wallah, لما أخذت النار في الدهليز. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he says, when the fire was burning through my house, نظرت إلى نسائي وبناتي يتراكضن في صحن الدار من حجرة إلى حجرة ومن مكان إلى مكان هذا وأنا معهن في الدار. Imam al-Sadiq says, the reason that I am crying is because when they set fire to my home, I looked around and I saw the women and the children running frantically in my house. They were running from room to room in a state of panic. And then the Imam says, فَتَذَكَّرْتُ رَوْعَ عِيَالِ جَدِّي الْحُسَيْنِ يَوْمَ عَاشُورَا. When I saw that my women and my daughters were running frantically throughout the house when the flames were spreading, I remember the daughters of Imam al-Hussein on the day of Ashura. I remember the day when the army of Umar ibn Sa'ad called out, أحرقوا بيوت الظالمين. I remember and I think about when Umar ibn Sa'ad said, burn the tents of the oppressors. Hamid ibn Muslim, who was narrating the events of that day, he says when they set fire to the tents, there was so much commotion, but there was one little girl who came out of the tent of Imam al-Hussein, and she caught my eye because her dress had caught on fire. He said that I went to her. She was a young girl. She was a very young child. I went to her. I wanted to extinguish the fire on her dress. But he said that when I came close to her, ارتعدت فرائصها وخافت. When I came close to her, she began shivering and trembling. She was afraid of me. She looked at me and said, Ya Am anta lana am alayna? Are you with us or are you against us? He says, La lakum wa la alaykum. I'm not with you nor am I against you. But oh little girl, who are you? She says to him, have you read the Quran? He says, yes, I've read the Quran. She says, have you read the Quran, the verse where Allah says, فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ, and do not reproach the orphan. He says, yes, I've read this verse, but who are you? قالت أنا يتيمة أبي عبد الله. I am the orphan daughter of Imam al-Hussein. She says to him that I need your help. He says, what do you want from me? He says, can you take me to the land of Najaf? Can you take me to the land of Ghari? Can you take me to Najaf? He says to her, what is in Najaf? Why do you want to go to Najaf? She says to him, oh uncle, my Aunt Zainab told me that there is a grave for my grandfather Ali ibn Abi Talib in Najaf. ما أتاه مكروب ولا طالب حاجة إلا قضى الله حاجته. My Aunt Zainab told me that whoever goes to the grave of Ali with a haja, Allah will grant him his request. He says to her that Najaf is too far. I cannot take you to Najaf. Is there any other place that you want me to take you? She says to him, خذني إلى شط الفرات. Take me to the Euphrates. He says that I escorted her to the Euphrates River, but as we came close to the Euphrates, when we got close to the banks of the Euphrates, suddenly I saw this young girl starting to run. He says that I thought to myself, maybe she's thirsty. Maybe she's running to go drink water from the river. But I saw her running towards a body with no arm. She must have thought to herself that if I cannot go to the grave of Ali, then at least let me go to the body of Abbas. La hawla wa la قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to accept these tears of grief. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal through these tears for the family of the Prophet to cleanse our hearts, to purify our souls. We ask Allah for the sake of these tears to forgive us our sins, to pardon our shortcomings. And most importantly, we ask Allah to give us the tawfiq to remain on the path of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And if we have drifted away from the path of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, we ask Allah to bring us back to that path. And most importantly, we ask Allah to help us, to make us worthy of the shafa'ah of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam on the day of judgment. يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إلا من أتى الله بقلب سليم وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل.
Matam Hussein,
Ya Hussein. 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 Hai Sakina, Hai Sakina, Hai Sakina, Hai Sakina, Hai Sakina, Sakina, Hai Sakina, Hai Sakina, दास्तां गम की रकम कुछ यूं सकीना कर गई है सकीना है सकीना है सकीना है सकीना दास्तां गम की रकम कुछ यूं सकीना कर गई रंग वो तस्वीर दी में रंग वो तस्वीर दी में अपने खून से भर गई है सकीना 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 सकीना उसकी रग रग में हुसैन इब्ने अली का खून है उसकी रग रग में हुसैन इब्ने अली का खून है कौन कहता है सकीना कैद में थी डर गई रंग वो तस्वीर दी में रंग वो तस्वीर दी में अपने खून से भर गई है सकीना है सकीना है सकीना है सकीना है सकीना है सकीना सकीना है सकीना 4 साला एक बच्ची कैद हो के शाम में 4 साला एक बच्ची कैद हो के शाम में एक अलग जिंदान में है दीन की खातिर गई रंग वो तस्वीर दी में रंग वो तस्वीर दी में अपने खून से भर गई है सकीना 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 इस कदर मानूस बीबी हो गई जिंदान में इस कदर मानूस बीबी हो गई जिंदान में शाम ही में रह गई वापस न अपने घर गई रंग वो तस्वीर दी में रंग वो तस्वीर दी में अपने खून से भर गई है सकीना है सकीना है सकीना है सकीना है सकीना है सकीना फुप्पी अम्मा आओ देखो शाम के जिंदान में फुप्पी अम्मा आओ देखो شام کے زندان میں بابا بابا کہتے کہتے ہائے سکینہ مر گئی. رنگ وہ تصویر دی میں، رنگ وہ تصویر دی میں اپنے خون سے بھر گئی. ہے سکینہ، ہے سکینہ، ہے سکینہ، ہے سکینہ، ہے ہے سکینہ، ہے ہے سکینہ. دیپ معصومہ کا ایسا ہو گیا چرچا میر، دیم معصومہ کا ایسا ہو گیا چرچا میر. سر کٹے خیمے جلے اور چادر اطہر گئی. رنگ وہ تصویر دی میں، رنگ وہ تصویر دی میں اپنے خون سے بھر گئی. ہے سکینہ، 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 ہے سکینہ. یا حسین، یا حسین، یا حسین.
اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد. توجہ زیادہ ایک تو سورہ فاتحہ کی درخواست ہے اپنے مرحومین کے لیے، ان کے مرحومین کے لیے جنہوں نے آج کی مجلس اسپانسر کی ہے، اور ان کے لیے جن کا کوئی پڑھنے والا نہیں ہے. السلام علیکم ابا عبداللہ، السلام علیکم ابن رسول اللہ، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ. السلام علیکم غریب الغرباء، السلام علیکم معین الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام علیکم شمس شموس، السلام علیکم المدفون بیرزتوس، السلام علیکم علی ابن مسیر دعوت حیات السلام، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ. السلام علیکم صاحب الاسر الزمان الامان الامان من فتنة الزمان، السلام علیکم شریک القرآن، السلام علیکم کاتب القرآن، السلام علیکم مظلومان، السلام علیکم امام زماننا ھذا اجل اللہ تعالی فرجک وسہل اللہ تعالی مخرجک وظہورک ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ. اللہ